Welcome to Grid Talk. My name is Ruby Price, and today we're here to review the Brazilian Grand Prix. Joining me today, we have Grid Talk's Louis Edwards,
Hello.
F1 journalist Jawad Yacoub,
Hi everyone.
and from Grip Strip Podcast, Phil Matthew.
Hello.
So, before we get into the episode, we must thank our sponsor for this episode, Bet Online. Bet Online is the world's most trusting betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch games as they happen. With the largest selection of odds on everything from football, NBA, NHL to entertainment and political props. Head to BetOnline today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline, the game starts here. And be sure to follow us on social media at GridTalk UK. If you're feeling extra generous, why not consider supporting us on Patreon for exclusive access and behind the scenes content? So, a Sunday full of action then, as for only the sixth time in F1 history, we had a qualifying on a Sunday morning, and what a morning we had. What a day we had. We had 5 red flags in qualifying, many and off. It clearly had a lasting impact as well because teams weren't even setting up in the correct grid spaces before the race. Now, obviously, overhanging the race result, we do have the race start procedure. Joward, because of a Lance Stroll beach on the formation lap, we ended up with an abandoned race start. Many drivers under investigation for an infringement. Norris, Russell, Lawson, and Yuki Tsunoda, they're all alleged to have breached the rules. What happened, and what do you think?
What do I think? I'm as confused as everyone was when watching what happened. Max Verstappen and his engineer knew what was going on because apparently when there is a orange light for an aborted start, you're supposed to sit there on the grid, and then it's 10 minutes before there'll be an actual restart. Team mechanics are allowed back onto the grid and whatnot, but this did not happen because Polstead and Norris decided to lead everyone around for another formation lap. So apparently there is a wording in the regulations that, when it comes to an aborted start, or abandoned start, I think there's a difference between the two. I still don't understand it myself. So that shows you the complexity in the regulations. Even the stewards probably don't know either, which is why we're still waiting for a investigational decision to be made on it at the end. So yeah, one apparently means that you go around for another formation lap immediately. The other one means you just sit there and wait until the 10 minutes is up. Mechanics come out and then they do another formation lap. So, I feel like this is unprecedented. We haven't seen this sort of thing before, I believe. So it's hard to say what kind of punishment can be dealt for this, whether it'll just be some kind of procedural punishment, a fine, or maybe some, yeah, fine perhaps, or will there be something more serious in terms of, time penalties or disqualification? I think more concerningly would be the tire pressure breaches, if there are any, with the Mercedes guys and with Sergio Perez as well. That would be a disqualification in my eyes. But what has happened with the start line infringement, it's not like what happened last week with Perez, where he was outside his grid box and that was declared a false start and, gaining an advantage as such. I don't think there was any advantage gained by what we saw Norris, both the RBs and Russell do. So perhaps it'll just be a situation where they're fine. But, I could be wrong. I'm not a steward. I don't work for the FIA.
I mean, after this race weekend, I'm not too sure anyone would really want to, despite the fact that they're talking now about, introducing permanent paid stewards across the entire season. And we will get to the stewarding, in fact. Louis, it's been a very busy weekend for the stewards and the race directors. It's going to continue to be a busy weekend for them as well. Obviously, lots of drivers are being summoned, and they may be summoned even further into this show as we're doing it live. So if anyone listening, please obviously take anything with a pinch of salt. We're doing it in advance before we know everything that's being declared. But there's been a lot of allegations of British bias across the weekend with timings of red flags, virtual safety cars becoming red flags. Like, are the stewards kind of in a position of damned if they do, damned if they don't?
I think that's just the way that modern Formula One is these days. You always have your fan bases, and you'll have those who think that the stewards are doing something that favors one team over another. I remember the days where the FIA were referred to as the Ferrari International Assistant. You know, um, we are just, it is definitely a case of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Regardless of what you think of the shooting decisions, they were at least fairly consistent this weekend. It's not like they were crazily changing them, especially when we were seeing the red flags in qualifying. They weren't always kept as double yellows for quite a while, whether it was Colapinto's crash, whether it was Sainz's crash, whether it was Alonso. Any of those red flags were usually not immediate. They were usually preceded by quite a lengthy double yellow, double yellow flag. So it's difficult. Should the red flag come out earlier? Yes. Yeah, I think we can, given the conditions, given, the fact that it's qualifying, cars are still going relatively fast, even if it's not, if it's yellows or not yellows. But, they were consistent. So clearly they have some sort of internal rules going on where that is the procedure that they follow. But a lot of drivers were a bit annoyed. Some drivers were probably a bit thankful because they were allowed to complete their laps. But in the race, the red flag um, came pretty pretty quick. Any sort of safety car decisions were sometimes a bit slow. When Hulkenberg went off, it was a bit slow. I was surprised on how long it did take for the virtual safety car to come out when Hulkenberg was just completely in the middle of the road and not moving. But yeah, I think coming back to the question of if there's bias, I don't think there's bias personally, but definitely needs to be a little bit clearer on what these procedures are, because I think it left a lot of people wondering why it's taking so long for certain decisions to be made.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just about to come on to that as well. Phil, where do you stand on this? Like, it does feel like the lack of transparency and, whilst it was better today, like the lack of consistency as well is leaving the stewards and the race directors at the mercy of allegations of favoritism. And given the decisions made recently, is there any validity to it?
I mean, I would question a lot of what they've been doing uh, over the last few years. They brought it on to themselves. You keep employing certain people that have made specific decisions. Um, and so the lack of transparency goes across the entire sport. I mean, it's fundamental. And I think that's why, yes, you have a sport that we have a bunch of competitive teams now. There's more interesting races these days. But these are the kind of things that we're talking about. They can't make quick decisions. They can't, like, when you have all this technology and you have all these people, it's like this is supposed to be the highest form of motorsport, they say, but they can't come up with decisions for hours on end. I mean, and then they make these kind of calls for what is a full safety car, what's a red flag, what's a VSC, I mean, come on. I mean, it it's kind of like in other other sports where they have permanent crews, or they should have permanent people in place. That's what has to happen here if they really want to have consistency, because then they'll have one person to go to if they want to. I mean, all these owners and team principals and drivers are all going to whine anyways. That's just what they are. But in the grand scheme of things, there should be consistency somewhere. And if there isn't going to be consistency with this, it's got the knock-on effect in many other areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Like consistency, transparency. I think they're the two biggest things that F1's viewership, F1's team members, F1's drivers are all kind of crying out for. But yeah, Louis, let's look at what's actually happened today then, because history has been broken in Interlagos. Max Verstappen coming from P17 to win, breaking Lewis Hamilton's record for starting in P10 and winning in 2021. Helped by the red flag, undoubtedly, he was able to change his tyres when Russell and Norris had pitted under the virtual safety car. But in today's conditions, Max was just in a league of his own.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think that I think we can talk about the red flag and the fact that he was able to change his tires all we want, but I think what made the key difference for Max was his opening lap. When you're starting down in P17 in these conditions, it's important to keep your nose clean and make sure you don't run into any incidents. And Max did that. He got a great start, made a lot of positions up very quickly. He kept on the outside at turn 3, really had so much more grip where all the other drivers were sort of hugging that inside line, just swept around the outside, gained a bunch of positions. Him and Hamilton, like together at the start, were really high flying, and then Max just lap after lap was just making those overtakes, cutting that position down, and next thing you know, he finds himself, it was like P7, kind of behind that Yuki train. Like, I think it was maybe P6, like P6, P7, behind that Yuki train. And that's where he sort of stagnated for a bit, but it didn't mean like his pace was any worse. He was still very much right on the back of Charles Leclerc. But yeah, the red flag certainly made a huge difference, gave him a huge advantage, but he had to take it on his own way. Initially Ocon managed to pull out a nice gap after the red flag restart, and if it wasn't for Max's like grit after the second safety car restart, maybe Ocon might have won. But at the end of the day, Max has won by almost 20 seconds. Like, and he only took the lead on lap 30 something. So in the less than the last 30 laps of the race, he's managed to pull out a 20-second gap, which just shows like just how good he is in the wet. This Red Bull may not be working particularly brilliantly, but when you stick Max behind the wheel, special things are going to happen.
Absolutely. And special things did happen today, I think, as well. He made that turn one corner his own. The inside of it belonged to Max Verstappen. So many late moves, so many unexpected moves, and very little contact as well involving his car and others, which, I think Red Bull will certainly take considering the narrative that's been going around lately. But rounding out the podium somehow, Joward, the two Alpines of Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly. It's the first time since South Korea in 2013 the Enstone-based team have had two finishers on the podium. How impressed were you with the French team today, who picked up a sizable haul of points and jumped from ninth to fifth in the championship?
Yeah, I'm a bit speechless, to be honest, because I don't think anyone at the start of this year had Alpine anywhere near a podium on their bingo cards, let alone actually being in contention to win early on as well. And, credit to Max Verstappen for being a master in these conditions. He took that opportunity away from Ocon, who did have quite a sizable gap, it must be said, before the red flag, I believe. But yeah, for all the stuff that team has been through, and by no means this is like, don't call it a comeback, I'd say, but this is motor racing, I guess. When you have a weird and wacky, rain affected race like this, you can often see some surprise results come out, and it's all about being in the right place at the right time. And for both the Alpines, it was not pitting before the red flag. In fact, I think they said in the commentary that, the Alpine pit crew didn't have to do anything all day because they got to change the tyres under the red flag conditions, so they didn't have to do a live pit stop during the race. Pierre Gasly going from 13th up into third as well, up 10 positions. And, Esteban Ocon, who's not going to be at that team next year, he's moving on to Haas. So I think that's a really lovely way for him to sign off from the French team that he's been with for several years now. Of course, he got the win for them back in Budapest a few years ago under similar circumstances, it must be said. So, I think the execution under the new team principal, Oliver Oakes, has been excellent today, and they caught a few of the bigger teams napping, it must be said. And like you said as well, for the Constructors' Championship, they're up to 6 now, and it's actually 5 points between them and RB back in 8. So we've got this battle now in the last few races between Alpine, Haas, and RB. So yeah, like what do they say? $50 million, I think this race is worth for Alpine, because it potentially may, if they stay in this position after the next few races, it could be a big injection that they've been looking for cash-wise, and hopefully it will result in them actually wisely spending that money on development and infrastructure moving forward.
Drive to Survive just got their season finale hook of, the championship battle reigniting for the midfield towards the end of the season, as though we've not been talking about Alpine finishing potentially ninth, 10th for, well, definitely not 10th, but ninth or 8th for the last good few weeks, completely ruining our own narrative. But Phil, a team that didn't look switched on at one of their favorite circuits of the last 10 years, Mercedes, George Russell's finished P4. Hamilton managed to bag the final point despite looking very uncomfortable in the car all weekend. They could have had a win today if they didn't pit, but was P4 good enough in the end?
I mean, I think early on, I figured the way things were going for Verstappen that he was probably going to win. I didn't know that there was going to get a couple of safety cars and a red flag and whatever, but in the grand scheme of things, the way that Mercedes handled that whole entire weekend, especially on the side of Lewis's car, was pathetic. But then when they had this race, they had made the start. Russell actually made the start. He was holding the lead. If you're going to pit, at least they made that decision when the conditions were the worst, and you saw that everybody that stayed out, of course, finished ahead of you. It was a bad mistake. Even Bernie Collins explaining that, they shouldn't have went on full wets. They still needed to stay on intermediates. Sure, it worked out that they needed to stay on intermediates, but they wait, I don't know, a lap, 2 laps, and they would have been able to pit and probably finish second. So they lost out on points. Granted, they're not going anywhere in the Constructors' Championship. Granted, for George, and it's really George and Lewis battling each other in the drivers, but it's a lost opportunity when there aren't very many opportunities the way that car has been all year, outside of that summer run that they had. It was just a waste of a weekend, really, to not be able to maximize your points. And we don't even know, let's be fair here on that too. We don't even know if they're even going to be classified. So you're going to go from possibly having a chance to win to maybe finishing second to now 4th and 10th to not being classified at all. So it's a total mess, and it kind of is what the last 3 years have been of Mercedes, and I think what will be moving forward. This is more of what this team is going to be like, And so, I mean, whatever they want to think or believe, but that this is just, I mean, I guess it's par for the course for what they've become and what I think they're going to be going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely worth bringing up as well. Obviously, there is that overhanging, sort of, oh, we changed the tire pressures whilst the tires were still attached to the car on that reformation grid. Excuse me. But yeah, obviously we await to see that. But according to Bernie Collins, the sort of precedent for that punishment would be a DSQ. Um, so yeah, it could be even worse for Mercedes, and they are ultimately in no man's land in the constructors. Not being classified won't hurt them in the standings, but you know, they want to finish off strong. Lewis Hamilton wants to finish off strong, and um, ultimately, that's just not where the team is at the moment. As everyone's kind of cottoned on to, post summer break Mercedes hasn't exactly been a five-star team. But you know what has been a five-star podcast? Us, as far as I'm concerned, at the very least. If you enjoyed it, we'd love it if you could take five to leave us a five-star rating on Spotify or a five-star review on Apple Podcasts. And also, if you are one of the 72% of people who aren't yet subscribed to the channel, please consider helping us out with a like and a subscribe. So I'm gonna take a look at the championship fight then, obviously. Louis McLaren coming home with Lando Norris in P6, Piastri serving that 10-second time penalty to be in P8. Somehow still leading the Constructors' Championship after Sainz retired. Red Bull and Ferrari only scoring with the one driver. But what does today's result mean for the championship?
I think it's dead. Honestly, I think it's now dead. We've got 3 races remaining. If I look at the constructors championship right now, Max Verstappen on 393 points, Lando Norris on 331, 62 point difference with 78 points available. Um, Actually, is there another sprint? Is there another sprint? Okay, so a little bit more points
Yeah, it's in
available.
Qatar.
Uh, um, but even then, I think it's far too much of an ask. It's a huge point deficit to overcome, and unfortunately, I think the way that McLaren were today, they took a lot of risks and they all failed miserably. Um, Lando, after securing pole, I thought it was going to be maybe a little bit more comfortable, but he lost the lead on the start again, and then McLaren made the decision to pit, which cost him big time, and then he lost another place on that restart to Leclerc, and then he lost another one to Piastri. It was just a horrific day for Lando Norris, is probably as far as he's concerned. And for Piastri, it was kind of unlucky for him with the penalty. With the way that turn one is in Brazil, those kind of accidents are sometimes really hard to avoid. If you're at the inside, because it's a late apex, the driver on the outside will want to cut in, and it unfortunately just leaves you in this just horrible place where you either back out and you're going to lose a load of time, or there's going to be a collision, and it was just unfortunate. And yeah, the 10 seconds is expected, and I didn't think anything else. As for the constructors championship, I think McLaren, as they're the only ones really consistently scoring good double points, I think they're still going to keep a nice sort of grip on that until the end of the season. But unfortunately, I think this is now marked the death of Lando Norris's driver championship hopes, and I would most likely expect Max will wrap up the championship in Qatar now.
Yeah, rest in peace, Lando's championship run. It was fun whilst it lasted. But I guess what this does mean now is that Oscar Piastri might be able to actually keep the wins that he deserves in races and sprint races, to make reference to yesterday's sprint, where obviously positions were swapped just before a virtual safety car came out, um, ultimately sealing the race. But yeah, Joward, double points for the junior RB team, ahead of a certain Mexican driver. But it did look like a very strong weekend for the RBs, at least particularly today. Making the most of the weird conditions. Yuki Tsunoda starting this race in P3 ultimately again was one of those drivers that lost out by pitting, when other teams didn't pit, but they're both ahead of Sergio Perez. If it was an audition for the second Red Bull seat, who would you pick out of Sonoda and Lawson based off this weekend?
It's a difficult question. Like I got my mind set on Liam Lawson, not only because he's from this part of the world, but also he just has come in and made a statement of intent. He kind of ruffled Perez's feathers in the last race, and it seems to have continued on into this race as well. I think it was you who mentioned in the live chat about how Perez seems to be driving around quite desperately at the moment with some of the maneuvers that he's making. So I'm surprised that he didn't cause more damage than was actually done. But credit to Yuki Tsunoda as well. He qualified the car up in third, and was looking quite good up there in the early part of the race, even though he was a little bit of a cork in the bottle. But then pitting before the red flag and the more rain that did end up coming in did ultimately undo them. But for them to finish where they did, seventh and ninth, I think really good result, all things considered. But unfortunately, the fact that Alpine have just become their main rivals in the Constructors' Championship is they're going to probably look at today and are ruining the fact that they didn't capitalize on the opportunity to get a podium. But I think, in the grand scheme of things, when it comes to who's taking that second seat at Red Bull, and whatnot, I think Lawson definitely finds himself in a good spot there, even though he did, I think, attract a 10-second penalty as well for a hit on Colapinto earlier in the race, or Behrman, one of them, I think. So, and Lawson too, the only rookie that survived this race too. And I think I was kind of reflecting during the race when we lost both, we lost Colapinto and Behrman had a few spins that, they've been amazing in the races we've seen so far, but I think they all got a bit humbled today in these conditions, very challenging, as we saw even the more experienced drivers being caught out too. So I think for Lawson to relatively incident free get through the day is something that he can be really proud of. And maybe that's, what they need is that consistency. Well, they definitely need that consistency at Red Bull, but that tenacity, I guess, to be able to play the long game and stick it out, but then be aggressive where he needs to, because Perez, unfortunately, just looks like a toothless tiger at the moment. And yeah, to have a go at the end at trying to get back at Hamilton and get in the points, but then just failing miserably. I think at one point he was 10th and went for a pass on Lawson, but then ended up losing out to Hamilton as a result. Just shows you, I guess, just where Checo is, and it's really sad to see. And I'm kind of at that stage where, while I've tried to prop him up as much as I can, or defend him, at that stage where it's like, just end it, mate. Just end it. It's not getting any better. And Red Bull are like not doing the greatest job to protect him or to keep him out of the scrutiny. But it might be just to cover other problems going on with that team at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, there's no tactic like deflection, and what could attract more deflection than a driver in a top team not performing? Phil, just a passing note on Interlagos then obviously. One did not start, four DNFs. Stroll didn't make it to the end of the formation lap. Albon didn't start. Hulkenberg received the first black flag since 2007. Colapinto and Sainz both dropped it in heavy weather. There's a whole host of drivers summed to the stewards afterwards. It's been a hectic weekend in Brazil, but with everything that happened, was this one of the most F1 race weekends of all time?
Yeah, I'd say so, and it's part of why everyone loves Interlagos anyways, because if it isn't the weather, it can be something else always going on, and we had a whole smorgasbord of events today, and it was definitely entertaining. You had 17th to first, uh you had Red RB, Toro Rosso, not minority, whatever they're called, being up there. You had the Enstone team through 96 different guises actually getting a double podium. I mean, they're Lewis Hamilton, who's so great in the wet over so many years, having absolutely nothing going right for him. I mean, people getting punted, people getting pushed off, and black flag. It was just there's so much going on. It reads like a movie script, but it was a Grand Prix. So I know Liberty probably loved that, but it also was interesting and entertaining and kept us on the edge of our seat, which is not something you usually say or have been saying about Formula One in recent years. So we'll give uh, uh, Sao Paulo and the Interlagos circuit credit for that. It was nice to actually see a unique race, as we're going to go to a couple of racetracks that are more benign as we get towards this last three races of the championship.
Yeah, it did kind of feel very much like a sort of race deserving of a championship finale. And then we're going to obviously go to Qatar, Vegas, and Abu Dhabi to round off the season. But yeah, it's certainly been a race weekend in Brazil. As not Louis, as Wayne said, I can't believe I've made the faux pas of grid talk. As Wayne said in the preview, if it's not at Interlagos, I don't want it. Um, sorry, Louis, sorry, Owain. But I'll give you a chance to rescue it. For me at the very least, by passing it on to you for some driver of the days. Like Grid Talk obviously voted for Max Verstappen. Who do you think was the driver of the day today?
Assume you meant me.
Yeah, you.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's got to be Max. I don't think there's really another choice. I mean, maybe if Yuki managed to hold on to P3, maybe I would have given it to Yuki. And honestly, fair play to both of the Alpines today, but Max from P17 to win the race. Yeah, I don't think there's another choice out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Bernd Maylander certainly put in a performance worthy of a driver of the day consideration. But Jared, how about yourself? Max Verstappen, somebody else?
Yeah, I'm going to stick with my vote that I put in the Grid Talk one, official Grid Talk one, which was Max. Masterful performance. If there was any doubt that, he was going to lose this world championship, that's been put to rest. But also, it serves as a bit of a reminder, like how great he is, the talent and everything. But then it just frustrates the living daylights out of me that he does stupid things like he did last week in Mexico and in the US as well, arguably. So, it's a very much a Jekyll and Hyde sort of Jekyll and Hyde sort of driver. But yeah, no, today he deserved all the plaudits and yeah, he'll be full-time world champion soon.
Phil, are you in agreement? Do you think Max Verstappen was the driver of the day today?
He was a driver of the day, but I'm going to go and give it to a team. I'm just going to give it to Esteban Ocon and uh, to get Pierre Gasly, the drivers for Alpine, because they took a team that has been nowhere all year and talking about maximizing a performance, maximizing a opportunity in a Grand Prix to get a double podium here, to make 33 points, an absolutely enormous result for that organization. So much going on and of course, I mean, with Ocon leaving the team too. I mean, I think I saw a random Jack Doohan sighting through pit road when everyone was walking back from the red flag. I mean, there's all kinds of Alpine goodness going on. So credit to them. Verstappen will get it, so that's fine. But I want to give credit to the Alpine team and their drivers for doing the job they were able to do today to get that double podium.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly would have been very easy for both the Alpine drivers and the team themselves to throw away the position that they were in. So certainly a performance to remember for Alpine for not going too far backwards during the race and actually making up places for some of the drivers too. But yeah, it's hard to argue against Verstappen, 17th to first, like in a league of his own today. Um, and yeah, that's our drivers of the day. So before we go on to a brief post show and answer some of your questions, just going to give a shout for some plugs and promos. So if you want to follow or hear anything more from me, I am at Ruby Price on Threads and Instagram. But Louis, anything you'd like to plug at this point?
Uh, Nothing personal, but obviously, please follow the Grid Talk socials. It's at Grid Talk UK on all social media platforms, even including YouTube. You can search at Grid Talk UK and you'll find us. Yeah, and whether it's on X, Threads, Instagram, or YouTube, make sure to give us a follow.
Nice having that consistent handle. So much more preferred. Jared, yourself, anything you want to plug?
Yeah, you could find my work on theraw.com.au where I do live blogs of all the F1 races and some articles about V8 supercars as well. I've been up since 1:30 a.m. this morning. The sun's about to rise actually here. In 3 minutes we're getting the sunrise. That'd be nice to show. But yeah, I'm live blogging all the Grand Prix, so you can check that out on there. And thank you again for having me on as always. Appreciate it with you guys.
And thank you for coming on. We appreciate the dedication. Phil, anything you want to plug at this point?
Yeah, I'll plug the Gripster podcast. We talk about all things motorsports, NASCAR, IndyCar, of course, Formula One, myself and my co-host Joshua Fine. And we do this every week. We'll do it later, a couple days from now, over 240 episodes. You can find us at Grip Strip Podcast on YouTube and at philipgmatthew.com. You can find the pod GSP basically anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can find me at pgmatthew28 on Twitter, pgmgsp28 on Instagram and Threads. And yeah, thanks for having me on. It's always great to be on with you, Ruby, Jawad, and Louis. And thanks, Aiden, as always, for all the great work you do behind the scenes. It's always nice to be on here on the Grid Talk.
Absolutely. Nothing without the panel, nothing without the producers. Thank you so much to everyone, and thank you to everyone that's watching now. But if you want to hear more from Grid Talk, it is available on YouTube where most episodes are recorded live, as well as Amazon Fire, Spotify, Apple Music, Burble, and Pocket Casts. Just search Formula One Grid Talk for our back catalogue of shows with previews and reactions to the race results. Thank you to Jared Bradley and Holly Eagle for supporting on Patreon. If you want to support the show further, why not sign up to Patreon for exclusive content? Also, make sure you subscribe to be the first to know when each new weekly episode is released. We'll be back soon with plenty more F1 content. Thank you very much for listening to the Grid Talk podcast presented by Bet Online, and goodbye. And as we quickly transition into a brief post show, thank you very much if you've been active in the chat. Just going to take a few of the questions. And I think Louis even kind of alluded to this during some of the comments. But from David Paulson. What do we think about red flag tyre changing? I believe that in F2, any stop during the VSE doesn't count as a mandatory stop. And what's the point of the wet tyres if the safety car is deployed under heavy rain? Obviously, we were in wet conditions, so that there was no requirement of a mandatory stop. But once again, it is a topic of discussion. Does stopping under the safety car or red flag, should it count towards a mandatory stop? And I'll open this up to the floor if anyone wants to take it from me.
I
No.
mean,
No.
Yeah, not a fan.
yeah, I don't. Yeah, I completely disagree with it. Too many times we've seen it can. It's a weird one because you can see it two ways. You see either one way it's completely unfair because those are just getting a completely cheap pit stop. It counts as a mandatory pit stop, and they gained huge amounts of time from it. But then on the other hand, you're like, well done. You've tricked them all, and you've got yourselves a few positions. Well done. It's the same as like pitting under a safety car. It's like a tactical pit stop, and you've gone,
Hmm.
wow, well done. But I think there is a big difference between actually coming into your pit box to make a pit stop. There's still, even if you did it under a VSC or a safety car, there's still that element of, oh, something might happen. It may not be the most advantageous thing, something can happen in the pit stop. But when it's under red flags, the teams have literally half an hour to sit and change your tires, and it doesn't really matter what time they do it. Um, I think it's something that really needs to be looked at, but there's never really been much talk about it from the FIA about changing it, so I don't think it will change.
I was just going to add that you can think back to Monaco and how it actually took away from the potential of a spectacle earlier in the year where everyone got their tyre stops done and out of the way, and it was a procession from the race restart to the end. So, it is a bit of a Marmite rule, I guess. On one hand, like Louis said, we might sit and celebrate if our favorite driver benefits from a cheap pit stop or, sorry, pitting under the red flag. But then, you might have a driver fall afoul of that. And then, you think it's the worst thing ever. But yeah, in terms of, entertainment, but also fairness, I think it's probably best to make it so that you can't pit under the red flag unless it's on absolutely safety grounds. But yeah, there's a lot that I would like to see done differently anyway, but that's a story for another time.
Story for another time, story for maybe even another podcast. Also going to take a question from Jared Bradley. Did McLaren err in setting the rear wing downforce too high to pass on the straights, or was that needed for staying on track in the conditions? Now, obviously, they did revert back to, well, actually, no, they brought a new rear wing to Brazil. They were that confident it would be brilliant in Brazil. And yesterday in the sprint, it showed that it was a good decision. But of course, they did decide to go back to the higher downforce spec rear wing that they used in Texas and Mexico. And ultimately, we heard on the radio, Lando Norris just didn't have the straight line speed to get past George Russell. So I guess there is obviously that trade-off of the increased downforce. But ultimately, it could have cost them a much more straightforward race. And what do we think? Have McLaren erred? Have they made the wrong decision? Um, and happy again to throw this out to anyone that wants to go for it. She says,
Um,
throwing the reel back. Go on, Louis.
no, I mean, at the end of the day, it kept both McLarens on track, which can be same. This can't be said for every other team that didn't have both drivers finish the race for whatever reason. I mean, the McLaren in general looked fairly stable throughout the race. I mean, we have to give credit to Lando Norris. That extra downforce probably helped him when he made that overtake on George Russell in those absolutely appalling conditions just before what's it, just before the safety car, and then the red flag came out. So it's a trade off, and it worked in quali. They got on pole. Um, I'm sure they were very happy with that. Had Lando maybe kept the lead, and maybe some decisions may have gone McLaren's way a bit more, they probably wouldn't be thinking this. Probably wouldn't be thinking too much about it. Unfortunately, I think just a lot of things didn't go McLaren's way today, and just the fact that Lando was stuck behind George for so long, probably just further adds to the the list of things that did not go McLaren's way this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. Not the best weekend for McLaren, but they picked up more points than Ferrari, so they obviously increased the lead on them in the championship. But now they just got to keep that P1 in the constructors, and we'll see what happens as we get towards the end of the season, which is obviously shaping up to be still quite the close battle going on in the constructors towards the end, and we look forward to seeing what happens then. But once again, thank you to Louis, thank you to Joward, thank you to Phil for joining me on this episode. Thank you to Aidan on the production, and we will see you next time that there is F1 to talk about. Thanks and goodbye.